Kim Il-sung was born on April 15, 1912 in Gopyeonmyeon, Taedong County, South Pyongan Province, present-day Mangyongdae, Pyongyang, as the eldest son of his father, Kim Hyung-jik, and his mother, Kang Pan-sok. Kim Il-sung's original name was not Kim Il-sung. He was born with the name Kim Sang-ju. There were quite a few different opinions as to why the name was changed, but Kim Il-sung's autobiography does explain why he changed it. But Kim Il-sung's autobiography is not to be trusted. Kim Il-sung's autobiography is essentially a fantasy novel. So there are many parts of Kim Il-sung's life that are quite mysterious. The stories in today's video are only the parts that have relatively good evidence and have been confirmed. According to the declassified documents from the CIA, he changed his name while stealing money and killing people in high school. There is also a story that there was a general named Kim Il-sung who fought against Japanese imperialism, but he disappeared at some point and Kim Il-sung started using his name. The thing Kim Il-sung was best at was stealing credit from others. Back to the main topic, Kim Il-sung was born during the Japanese colonial period. Kim Il-sung's father, a tenant farmer, was an independence activist who was imprisoned for the Joseon National Association incident. After his release, the family moved to Jilin province in Manchuria, and in 1919, Kim Il-sung, who was 8 years old at the time, also went to Manchuria. Afterwards, he returned to Pyongyang alone at his father's recommendation and went to school while staying at his maternal grandparents' house. But after 2 years, he returned to Manchuria after hearing news of his father's arrest. However, when Kim Il-sung was 16 years old, his father was assassinated, and he continued to live an unstable life under his single mother. The irony is that Kim Il-sung's father was an anti-communist. Kim Il-sung's father worked as an unlicensed doctor in Manchuria and made money by selling opium, but was assassinated by communists because he was anti-communist. Anyway, when his father died, his life began to be difficult. He transferred schools here and there and wandered. Then, in middle school, he was introduced to Lenin's theory of imperialism through a Chinese teacher. Kim Il-sung began to feel the charm of various ideologies, including communism and imperialism. Kim Il-sung's interest soon began to manifest itself in action. In May 1929, Kim Il-sung joined the Korean Communist Youth Association and began communist activities. His father was killed by a communist, so it would be normal for an ordinary person to unconditionally hate communists. However, there may have been something for Kim Il-sung that transcended his father's death. Alternatively, he may have perceived it as an opportunity. At that time, communism represented a new wave and trend, unlike today. Moreover, it was China. However, Kim Il-sung's activities in the Korean Communist Youth Association were soon caught by the Japanese police. Kim Il-sung was imprisoned. When he was released in 1930, he had nowhere to go. He was even expelled from school. Kim Il-sung had two choices. He could either live off of odd jobs or knock on the door of the communist forces again. Kim Il-sung chose the latter. He went to the Communist Revolutionary Army led by Lee Jong-rak. Lee Jong-rak seemed to like Kim Il-sung, so Kim Il-sung made him the leader of a tax collection unit for weapons procurement. It is often said that positions make people. Those who have served as squad leaders in the military will have felt this. When a person is given a rank, they feel a sense of responsibility. They feel like they have to act accordingly and do not want to disappoint those around them. Kim Il-sung, who first took on the role of squad leader, was like that. No, Kim Il-sung was a bit excessive. Kim Il-sung did not hesitate to use any means necessary to collect money. Kim Il-sung's tax collection squad was called the Magoldan. They would visit farmers and extort money, or if they had Chinese or Korean children studying abroad in Japan, or if they were looking to make a living, they would go to them in groups and yell at them to give up their money, and they would even resort to violence, just like the mafia. Up until this point, Kim Il-sung was clearly using the name Kim Sang-ju. As I said before, there are many speculations and hypotheses about the origin of the name Kim Il-sung, so no one knows the exact truth, but he became Kim Il-sung around this time. However, the Korean Revolutionary Army did not last long. Well, it is even more strange that it lasted so long when it was doing gangster things. The Chinese police, unable to bear it any longer, arrested them and as they incurred so much resentment that they were often killed or arrested by the Japanese, they eventually fell apart. Kim Il-sung had nowhere else to go, but in 1931, Japan caused the Manchurian incident. The Chinese Communist Party ordered the organization of anti-Japanese guerrilla units. Communist guerrilla units were organized in various places in Manchuria. Kim Il-sung, who had nowhere to go, joined the anti-Japanese guerrilla units without hesitation. Kim Il-sung was active in the Northeast Anti-Japanese United Army, an armed force led by the Chinese Communist Party until 1942. At that time, Kim Il-sung was active as a platoon leader, a fact that is known today as the Kim Il-sung unit of the partisan faction. The records of this period are written in a dazzling manner in Kim Il-sung's memoirs, but most of them are false. The only feat that has been confirmed to be true is the Battle of Honggi-ha. This is a battle in which the guerrillas led by Kim Il-sung fought against the Maida police suppression unit, and it is one of the few anti-Japanese achievements of Kim Il-sung that is acknowledged in academia. After the Honggi-ha battle, Kim Il-sung married Kim Jung-suk and had a child. The child born at that time was Kim Jong-il. However, soon after, the Northeast Anti-Japanese United Army was annihilated by the Japanese Kwantung Army's suppression operation. Kim Il-sung fled to the Soviet Union. Kim Il-sung led the guerrillas and joined the 88th International Brigade commanded by the Soviet Army. This incident of being under the Soviet Union later became the opportunity for Kim Il-sung, who had no talent, to take control of North Korea. Kim Il-sung, who entered the Soviet Union, was initially suspected of being a Japanese spy. The Soviet Union planned to kill him immediately if necessary. Whenever he was in danger of death, Kim Il-sung avoided death by using the fluent Chinese he had learned as a child. He also studied Russian diligently. Eventually, he fought against the Japanese army with the Soviet army and even became an officer in the Soviet army. In 1945, the United States, which wanted to end the protracted war with Japan, completed the atomic bomb, and the Soviet Union also knew about this. Japan's defeat was almost certain. The Korean Peninsula was in a very important position for exerting influence in the East Asian order. As tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union escalated over the Korean Peninsula, both nations agreed to draw the 38th parallel and jointly expel the Japanese forces. Consequently, administrative control was transferred from the Japanese, with Soviet troops governing the northern region and American forces managing the southern region of the Korean Peninsula. Soviet Union's Stalin had always been aiming for communization of the Korean Peninsula, with a tense standoff with the United States looming. Stalin needed a puppet in Korea. At that time, the person Stalin chose was Kim Il-sung. In fact, there was already a strong communist force in Joseon under Park Hon-young, and even if it weren't for Park Hon-young, there was no reason to choose Kim Il-sung in terms of ability and virtue. However, Stalin literally wanted a puppet. He thought that if he had a capable and thoughtful person under him, he would definitely not listen, or would be difficult to control. At that time, there were many big-name communist figures both domestically and internationally, but Kim Il-sung was a nobody that no one had heard of. So Kim Il-sung crossed over to the northern part of the Korean Peninsula with the Soviet army and first absorbed the local communist force, the Kapsan faction. Park Hon-young, the #1 communist force that had established its base in the Korean Peninsula, especially in the south, was embarrassed by the emergence of Kim Il-sung, but he could not ignore Kim Il-sung, who had the Soviet Union behind him. Kim Il-sung could not ignore Park Hon-young, who enjoyed enormous support at home either. On October 8, 1945, these two met near the 38th parallel. However, their differences of opinion were much more serious than expected. The Soviet Union listened to Kim Il-sung's opinion. It may have been the Soviet Union's opinion. In order to prove his existence, Kim Il-sung suppressed the opposition and promoted socialist land reform and industrial reform. While building up the army and preparing the constitution, he also cruelly purged his political enemies, the wealthy and right-wing independence activists. This was to show off his loyalty to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union really liked Kim Il-sung who did things without having to say anything. Kim Il-sung succeeded in absorbing all the large-scale communist forces except for Park Hon-yong, such as the Chinese Yan'an faction and the Soviet faction, while receiving active support from the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, in the south, where the US military ruled, no political power was recognized. Kim Il-sung did not agree with Kim Koo and Kim Kyu-sun's plan to establish a unified government, and eventually, on May 10, 1948, the first democratic election was held in the south. Syngman Rhee was elected as the first president, and on August 15 of the same year, the Republic of Korea government was established. Park Hon-yong, who could no longer remain in South Korea, which was increasingly moving away from communism, crossed over to the north and joined Kim Il-sung. In this way, Kim Il-sung's Korean Workers' Party became complete, and in August 1948, North Korea also held its own elections, and Kim Il-sung rose to the top of North Korea. On September 9, 1948, Kim Il-sung declared the establishment of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. This was the moment when the current North Korea was practically completed. On the surface, it was perfect, but in reality, it was a little different. Communism was an ideology that had only recently been born, and there were too many factions. It was also a kind of utopia, so everyone had their own part that impressed them. Too many factions did not create a sense of unity, and even a small number of people called out Park Hon-yong's name. Kim Il-sung did not like Park Hon-yong's existence. From Park Hae-on-young's perspective, the North, which was unable to exert influence, was simply uncomfortable. At that time, what Park Hae-on-young advocated was an invasion of the South. Although their goals were different, the common argument between Kim Il-sung and Park Hae-on-young was war. Park Hae-on-young thought that if he started a war, his forces in the South would quickly overthrow the South Korean government, and the United States would not intervene. Kim Il-sung and Park Hon-yong received permission from Stalin of the Soviet Union and Mao Zedong of China to start the Korean War. However, as we all know, the Korean War unfolded in a completely different way. The United States immediately supported South Korea, and the Incheon Sangril operation completely reversed the situation. Park Hon-yong's power had already been purged and shattered in South Korea. Contrary to expectations, Kim Il-sung, who was anxious about the situation in which North Korea was being pushed back, sent a letter to Stalin on July 8, 1950, asking for support. It is now a well-known fact that the Korean War began with North Korea's invasion of the South, but at the time when this letter was not made public, there was a lot of debate about whether it was an invasion from the North or the South. Anyway, the war has ended. In a war that was not won, someone had to take responsibility. As everyone expected, Kim Il-sung placed all the blame on Park Hon-yong. He falsely accused Park Hon-yong of being a spy for the US military, executed him, and purged all those related to him. The communist big shots of the Soviet Union and China factions were no exception. They were all executed or assassinated as criminals. Hey, even so, was there a reason to do this? Yes, there was. At that time, Kim Il-sung's position was shaken. It wasn't just because of the Korean War. Stalin died 4 months before the end of the Korean War, and his successor, Nikita Khrushchev, was a very critical figure of Stalin. Khrushchev tried to oust Kim Il-sung, who ruled with a dictatorship cult like Stalin. Kim Il-sung tried to gain an overwhelming position internally because he thought that he could not solve the problem by wagging his tail externally. However, people who criticized Kim Il-sung appeared. There may have been a coup d'etat that we are not aware of, but the August factional incident, an incident that publicly criticized Kim Il-sung, broke out. For several years after the August sectarian incident, Kim Il-sung eliminated all his political opponents through endless purges and executions. This trend continued until the 1960s, and now there was no turning back. Determined to establish a more powerful dictatorship, Kim Il-sung even attempted ideological reform. Juche ideology is originally a philosophical principle that people are the masters of everything and decide everything. But Kim Il-sung changed it into Kim Il-sungism and used it as a strategy of deification to reign as the absolute god of the country. In 1970, he was re-elected as the General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea at the 5th Congress. And in 1972, He changed the state power structure to a system centered on the chairman of the state through a constitutional amendment. I said earlier that North Korea was complete in 1948. 1972 is the moment when the current dictatorship was completed. North Korea's economy was better right after the Korean War. Well, they were carrying out various economic projects, but they were all ruined. If the results had been good, North Korea's economy would not be like this now. Kim Il-sung, who gained overwhelming power, has since shown international rather than political moves. He traded with other countries, competed with South Korea, and in the early 1990s, he promised to meet with Kim Young-sam and was even mentioned as a candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize. Then, he passed power to his son, Kim Jong-il, and died of a myocardial infarction on July 8, 1994. Looking at Kim Il-sung's life, one can sense that he was not an individual with the capabilities to serve as a leader of a nation. He appears to be an ambitious figure without talent, born into a tumultuous era that thrived on manipulation. While his existence may have been a disaster for the collective, one could also argue that he was fortunate on a personal level. What are your thoughts on this?